In 1949, the Chinese Civil War had been raging on for over 20 years between the nationalist government under Chiang Kai-shek and the communists of Mao Zedong. Suffering defeat after defeat, the nationalists, looking to avoid complete annihilation, made the difficult decision to abandon the mainland and flee to the island of Formosa, now known as Taiwan and its surrounding islands. The remnants of the Republic of China had become what we know as today as Taiwan. What followed was a period of brutal military repression. Paranoia and fear of an invasion by the People's Liberation Army fueled an oppressive state that cracked down on its population's freedoms, justifying its cruel actions as safeguarding from communist infiltration. Anything deemed to be anti-government to the ruling Kuomintang was met with torture, imprisonment, and sometimes even death. Over 100,000 people would become victims of what became known as the White Terror. This is where we get to Detention, a game not only set in this very grim period of time, but actively exploring and highlighting this history that most outside of Taiwan aren't familiar with. It is a treasure trove of history and culture, mixed together into a narrative that shows a side of Taiwan practically forgotten outside of the island nation, but one that had its real, tragic impact on so many millions of lives. I will preface this with a warning. I myself am not Chinese by any means and by extension don't speak Mandarin. As such, I will undoubtedly mispronounce virtually all the names and locations I will note in this video. I just want to make my apology apparent early on, as I will unsurprisingly be saying a lot of Chinese words in this video. Additionally, this video is also not meant to be a deep dive into the story of Detention. I will be primarily looking at the game's historical and religious references, only mentioning elements of the story when their context is necessary. Though, if you want to see a video going through this game's beautifully written story, I would be more than happy to work on that. But moving on, Detention is a 2017 horror game developed by the Taiwanese developer Red Candle Games, based in Taipei. You may have heard of them before, as their follow-up game Devotion, also set in 20th century Taiwan, was steeped in controversy when hidden text referencing Xi Jinping being Winnie the Pooh was found, leading to the game being review bombed by Chinese players and ultimately pulled from Steam permanently. Though that isn't relevant to what I'm discussing today. To begin, we must first understand the background to Detention. In 2013, developer Coffee Yao was motivated into creating a game that, in his own words, represent our culture and share with the world the place I grew up in. He began crafting the world of Detention, incorporating Taiwanese and general Eastern elements into it. Yao then approached fellow developers Light Wang and Henry Wang. Instantly, they knew they had a promising title on their hands. With others joining them, they hurriedly came together to show the world a game unlike any other, one that was uniquely Taiwanese, from the little nods and references sprinkled throughout down to the various puzzles the game offers. Detention is one of the few games out there that is set in Taiwan, and out of all of them, it is really the only one that envelops itself within the country's rich but dark history. Before we delve into the content of the game itself, we have to first know and understand when exactly it is set. Detention is set in the 1960s, smack dab amid what is known as the White Terror period of Taiwan, a time of military dictatorship and martial law. Like most problems in East Asia, it relates back to Japan and its complicated history. With Japan's defeat ending the Second World War, Formosa and its surrounding islands, which make up modern Taiwan, were returned to Chinese rule. Although celebrated in the mainland as a return of stolen lands, the people living on the island didn't exactly share this enthusiasm. While they experienced relative peace and prosperity under Japanese rule for 50 years, now their home was being flooded with undisciplined conscript soldiers sent over to enforce law and order. To the Hokkien-speaking Taiwanese, these Waisheng soldiers who spoke Mandarin were foreigners. Add to that the constant reports of these troops looting and squabbling with locals, and anti-mainland sentiment unsurprisingly skyrocketed. This culminated in the 228 incident, also known as the February 28th incident. On this day in 1947, Monopoly Bureau officers stopped one Lin Chiang Mai, a 40-year-old widow selling cigarettes on the roadside. They demanded she hand over her contraband as a crowd began to gather around the scene, shouting at the officers to leave Lin alone. It didn't take long for tensions to rise, and one officer hit Lin in the head with the butt of their pistol, and another had wounded a bystander with a bullet. This one event would be the straw that broke the camel's back. By the next day, the island erupted into open rioting, bordering on rebellion. Amidst the burning government buildings, rioters held up signs proclaiming the independence of the island and the end of mainland rule. The Kuomintang, the nationalist government, cracked down on the rebellion hard. One witness account highlights the brutality that the government responded with. One foreigner counted more than 30 bodies in student uniforms lying along the roadside east of Taipei. They had their noses and ears slit or hacked off, and many had been castrated. 2 students were beheaded near the front gate. This wood-carving piece by Huang Rongkan, titled The Horrifying Inspection, was made in the aftermath of the violence. It's a grim depiction of soldiers massacring people selling cigarettes, an obvious reference to Lin and the many others who were needlessly murdered by those who were considered foreigners to the land. Huang was later executed for treason in 1952. The chaos left thousands dead. In 1948, the KMT passed the long-titled bill, The Temporary Provisions Effective During the Period of National Mobilization for the Suppression of the Communist Rebellion. I should make note that there was little evidence to suggest communists had any notable involvement in the rebellion. People were upset with the government's mishandling of the island, but the KMT couldn't handle that fact. The signing of this law enacted martial law on Taiwan. Civil liberties were suspended, and the authorities had the power to detain and charge anyone with absolute impunity. The situation only got worse as the nationalist grip on power in the mainland deteriorated. 1949 saw the end of KMT rule in China. With a communist victory imminent, the KMT fled to Taiwan to avoid total collapse. Over 2 million soldiers, officials and their families ultimately stepped foot on Taiwan, the new home of the nationalists, fending off raids from the People's Liberation Army on small island garrisons and proclaiming that one day they would use Taiwan as a springboard to retake the mainland. What was once just another territory became the last stronghold of the Republic of China. This new one-party state was turned into nothing short of a military dictatorship, with Chiang Kai-shek as general leader for life. The Kuomintang used the excuse of the communist threat to keep martial law indefinitely, continuing to arrest and execute alleged dissidents for anything regarded as anti-government and communist. Martial law itself would not be repealed until 1987, 38 whole years, the longest martial law has ever been continuously enforced in history. Now that we have a basic understanding behind the game's time period, we can delve into the 2 major parts of Detention, the history it presents in its environment and its integral religious references. After that, we will see how these 2 culminate into the story that truly give this game its, as previously mentioned, uniquely Taiwanese identity. Detention gives no delay in giving us our first historical mention. The game begins in a classroom of Greenwood High School, located in a rural mountain region of the country. The teacher, Miss Yin, is giving a lesson on military history. She is discussing the Northern Expedition. In short, this was a campaign by the Kuomintang in the 1920s during the warlord era to reunify China after the country became divided post-1916. This ultimately ended in Chiang Kai-shek becoming the ruler of mainland China. This one sentence is very important in establishing what kind of environment these students have been taught in, promoting the regime's past achievements to the youth to emphasize that they live and serve a proud state with a proud history behind it. The enemies across the strait represent barbaric rule. This is the material children of this time were taught to become loyal for the regime that they might one day die for. We hear the students whisper about the stern, hard-faced man walking by the classroom. He is instructor Bai Gaofeng, a veteran of the Chinese Civil War. A lot of the students fear him as he is likely the equivalent of a political commissar for the school. For those who don't know, a political commissar is an officer whose main purpose is to enforce the ruling ideology of the unit they are assigned to. Bai's purpose, therefore, is to spread government propaganda inside the school and keep the students in check, leaving no room for disobedience. Think of him as a supervisor of sorts. In one of the records of the game, Bai is listed as officially being a JROTC officer. I'm not too certain on what this acronym stands for, but given the context of his job, I think it stands for something similar to Junior Reserve Officers Training Corps, so essentially he's a part of an army program in the school, which isn't surprising seeing how vehemently patriarchy he is. He isn't the only person with a past military background in the school as well. There is Mr. Cao, the janitor, and the unnamed principal, the father of Miss Yin. They are both mentioned in passing comments to have served during the war, though we know virtually nothing beyond that, though we do have some clues to their past. The principal's office has rows of books on military history and tactics, suggesting he was most likely a high-ranking officer. Mr. Cao, on the other hand, has a bit more to him. In the janitor room we find the lone table has knife marks on it, and it's where we find the previously collected die become pulled out teeth, relevant for one of the early game puzzles. The environmental clues lead me to believe that Mr. Cao had either been an interrogator for the nationalists in the war, or was a member of the secret police. Either way, it appears he was involved in the brutal torturing of people. Some may be spies for the communists, or, more likely, demanding they give up imaginary enemies of the state as he pulled at their teeth and stabbed their skin with every unsatisfactory answer. Now, why is there such a prominent amount of former military working at this rural school in the mountains? More than likely, it's because much of Taiwan's population had fought in the war and, well, the devs needed to add some background. But interestingly, the government at the time had been bringing in policies to provide important positions to retired police and servicemen, namely in the country's large businesses, in order to aid efforts to integrate the millions who had fled in 1949 into Taiwanese society. Perhaps Mr. Bai, Mr. Cao, and the principal were brought in to work at Greenwood High School under these policies. Either way, the presence of these three highlight how the White Terror had its effects on every part of Taiwanese life, even in a place like a school. These students aren't only bombarded by constant propaganda that is so obvious they can see through it, they are monitored by a strict instructor looking to punish anyone who speaks ill, and the adults they are meant to trust were a part of the same regime breathing down their necks. Our character even asked in the principal's office, are all schools like this? While staring at the military books, emphasizing that this is all these kids know. They don't know a life outside of the jingoism of Cold War Taiwan. Anyways, Bao asks to speak with Miss Yin. The screen fades to black and he asks, Miss Yin, have you seen this list before? We can find a note on a desk about the well-being of Miss Yin. Apparently, Miss Yin has been calling in sick recently and thus hasn't been able to teach for a while. Considering how Bao questioned her before, we can infer that her absence is related to it in some way. Perhaps Yin was a bit too careless with what she said, or she said something at the wrong time in front of the wrong people. Any hint of dissent was viewed as a threat to the KMT. To call them paranoid would be an understatement. After all, much of the Nationalist Army defected to the Communists during the war, and compared to the mainland, they were just a little rock that could be bombed and invaded at any point. Like most authoritarian regimes, it wasn't uncommon for critics of the ruling powers to disappear, snatched away in the middle of the night or on their way back from work. Such as the case was Huang Wenkang, when he disappeared from his family in 1953, only to resurface as a prisoner put to death. Families weren't safe either. Relatives would be stalked by officers several times a day to keep them in line. We can even find a public announcement encouraging students to tell on others who show signs of disloyalty. This announcement also reinforces the notion that the civil war is ongoing in the eyes of the KMT, justifying their cruel treatment of their people as necessity. As mentioned before, Chiang Kai-shek almost always maintained the belief that they would conquer the mainland again using Taiwan as a launch site. He didn't see Taiwan as a home, rather just a temporary camp of sorts. So to the Generalissimo, there would always be war until the mainland was retaken. Though this talk of an ongoing war wasn't entirely just a propaganda mouthpiece. The game slang of the 1960s puts it relatively close to the First and Second Taiwan Strait crisis, where the communists and nationalists traded blows against each other on their contested islands. The KMT held Matsu, and Kinmen and other island chains experienced harsh attacks, with Kinmen in particular being bombarded with artillery on and off for not only a few months but over 20 years. This differs massively from other Cold War rivalries. Unlike, say, the two Koreas, who rarely took shots at each other, this conflict is hot and risks becoming hotter at any moment. This adds to Detention being unmistakably Taiwanese in its nature, of the regime's ever-growing justification for their opposition being to safeguard from the outside threat. But what else is unmistakably Taiwanese is the surveillance. Again, in the principal's office we can find a watch list, though the folder itself is empty. This tells us that the school was keeping an eye on students they thought were suspicious, which unfortunately wasn't uncommon at this time. While today we have endless rumors of teachers spying on students, for Cold War Taiwan they weren't rumors but facts. People everywhere had to watch what they said, watch what they did, because someone was always noticing. A simple bit of suspicion, even unfounded, would put someone at risk of the secret police to be taken away to one of their many holding facilities and prisons the KMT constructed to deal with political opposition. In the school's basement, we can even find prison cells holding students, tied up with bags over their heads, awaiting further torture. Holding facilities and detention centers were rife on the island as the regime needed places to support the influx of people imprisoned as the White Terror became more extreme. These facilities are eerily reminiscent of many of the facilities that can be found in Taiwan, such was Green Island, southwest of Formosa. This little patch of land contained two facilities, the New Life Correction Center and Green Island Reform and Re-Education Prison. Their eerie names hide nothing about the purpose of these facilities, to correct political dissidents and re-educate them through torture and abuse of all kind, while their screams were unheard. Dave from Randomwire puts it best, Green Island was a great place to hide all the people the KMT didn't like. But the physical abuses of the regime wasn't limited to just these facilities. In the nurse's office we can find a report detailing injuries some students received. These aren't the typical cuts and bruises you'd expect to happen in school, but of fractured and comminuted bones. Our character even questions, how can students be injured so severely like this? It is clear this is of a student taken away by the secret police and beaten, either to give up information about other communist dissidents, or just because the officers had the power to do such a thing to the kid and thus they did it. And to think they were just a bunch of kids who probably did nothing generally harmful but caught the wrath of the adults for ideology's sake. Though this begs the question as to why were these students targeted. A note we can find shows students gossiping about the book club and how they are allegedly reading prohibited material, the material in question being literature and writings that went against what the regime taught. As expected, communist books were banned, but so were anything that could be deemed as a critic of the KMT. Even Western-style books were banned as they conflicted with the state's Sino-centric views. The worst of these prosecutions was the Kaohsiung incident. In 1979, the Formosa magazine publication debuted. It was steeped in controversy on release, its title itself foregoing the Chinese imposition of Taiwan. The government was unsurprisingly quite upset with the magazine, which led to a massive crackdown on 200 activists outside the offices during a Human Rights Day protest. 14 activists were arrested, with multiple of them suffering torture while in custody. The wife of one of these held, Lin Yi-sung, contacted Amnesty International over his treatment. In retaliation, Lin's mother-in-law and 6-year-old twin daughters were murdered in their home, despite the surveillance of the police. These are the risks these students are taking, risking not only themselves but their families as well with this book club. And the game makes sure to show us who is responsible for all this suffering, with the statue of Chiang Kai-shek located outside. This isn't just a showcase of nationalism, but of a real phenomenon in Taiwan. Statues of the former leader are everywhere, whether it is the big statue at White Memorial Hall in Taipei, or one of the many dumped in Taoyuan. There's an epidemic of them in Taiwan, with around 40,000 made to venerate the man in every public place imaginable. Many have been removed over the decades as public perception of the leader have become more and more controversial. In Taoyuan, there's even the Garden of Generalissimos, a garden filled with hundreds of Chiang Kai-shek statues. Statues of him are not only reflective of his rule but also of Taiwan at this time, focused so much on a cult of personality of the unifier of China. Despite Detention not directly naming figures, it still makes the effort to have their presence felt. After all, there can't be a Republic of China without Chiang Kai-shek. His imagery was everywhere. Even after his death in 1975, the KMT still venerated him with this bizarre memorial song. President Chiang, you are the savior of mankind. You are the savior of the whole world. You are the lighthouse of freedom. You are the great wall of democracy. Yeah, I really don't have an explanation for that. Interestingly enough, while not relevant to this video, Chiang Kai-shek was never actually buried. His body was placed in a black sarcophagus so that one day he may be finally buried in the soil of his homeland in Fenghua when the mainland is taken. Kinda sweet until you remember he was a brutal dictator responsible for tens of thousands of deaths. But anyhow, let us circle back to the book club mentioned previously. Late into the game we get to witness the titular group in one of their meetings. Miss Yin explains to the students that though these texts are to teach them to keep an open mind and not accept the straightforwardness of their state-approved textbooks. A detail I love is that while Miss Yin is the organizer of the book club, Mr. Chang, the counselor, is noted to be the supplier, obtaining the books via a shipping company. It's a detail that makes the world feel more rich and alive, and explains how they got their hands on these materials despite their ban. Secret organizings like these were and are a staple of authoritarian regimes. When the state bans material, people will undoubtedly find ways to get their hands on it. Though what is of more important note is what happens after. When the book club list gets leaked, revealed to be by our protagonist herself, we get this vivid scene. The members of the book club are rounded up and arrested, taken away by soldiers to unknown fates. Unfortunately, a common outcome for the over 100,000 people who were imprisoned during the White Terror. Some, like Mr. Chang, were sentenced to death, as did 4,000 others in this period. Though in truth, we don't know the true number. What records we have are only what survived the dictatorship. There is still much we don't know, with the public still prodding government archives for more answers. Miss Yin was lucky enough to escape before she could be caught, fleeing the country and becoming a prominent human rights activist. This isn't unique to just Yin herself. She is one of thousands of dangwai, political activists and politicians from outside the KMT. They circumvented the general ban on political parties by running as independents and even end up in some pretty significant positions, like Chen Shu-buan, the lawyer of the Kaohsiung activists. A year following the incident, he would run for Taipei City Council and win, becoming a dangwai councillor. Chen himself would actually become president of Taiwan in 2000. Back to Miss Yin though. She in particular is a dangwai exile, one who worked from outside of Taiwan, mainly due to fears of political retaliation. Most of them could be found in the US, writing and speaking out against the KMT whenever possible. They were a large part of the international pressure put on the Taiwanese government to reform, though Taiwanese agents were stationed in the US to keep tabs on them. As you can already see, the oppressive state of the White Terror wouldn't last forever. Detention gives us a glimpse into the country after the end of martial law. In 1975, Chiang Kai-shek's 47-year-long rule of the Republic of China and his 26-year-long rule over Taiwan came to an end with his death. His successor was his son, Ching Chang-kwa. Initially, he continued the authoritarianism of his father and denied the idea of being Taiwanese. However, as his health declined, in the late 80s, he realized the Republic of China couldn't sustain itself with the KMT's grip on power weakening and Taiwan's future becoming uncertain. Thus, in 1987, he would announce, "I am Taiwanese." Ching Kuo declared an end to the martial law after 38 years. Opposition parties like the Democratic Progressive Party, DPP, suddenly found themselves legalized and able to run against the KMT. Families torn between the strait were now able to visit each other, and political activists were able to express themselves freely without the fear of retaliation from the state. The successor to Ching Kuo would not be one of his own kin, but instead it would be partyman Li Tenghui. However, the reforms weren't done. Even with the sweeping changes to the country, the people were still fed up with the fact the KMT Majority Assembly were the only ones electing the president and not the people. The resulting 6-day-long White Lilies movement came about just a year after the Tiananmen Square massacre. The movement advocated for, among other things, a new National Assembly to be created and the previous martial law bill to be repealed. The protesters chose to use the Formosan lily as their emblem, partly because it is a species native to the island, reflecting the fact that this was a Taiwanese movement led by people who considered themselves Taiwanese. It was also chosen due to it being a symbol of youth, with much of the protesting body being made up of students. Over 5,000 people would gather at the Chiang Kai-shek Memorial Hall. On March 21st, Li Teng invited 53 protesters and negotiated with them, where he accepted all of their terms. Taiwan had finally achieved the freedom thousands sacrificed and died fighting for. In 1991, the Communist Bill had been repealed, almost 50 years after it was originally written. Taiwan held its first democratic election in 1996. Our character here, revealed to be Wei from the beginning of the game, survived his prison sentence and received amnesty. Wei represents the nameless thousands who outlived the cruel institution that had oppressed them. While the perpetrators are gone from power, the trauma still remains, taken away from their family members who passed while they were imprisoned, and ultimately losing their youth to little more than politics. As Wei writes, "It doesn't matter what I was feeling back then, only pain and sadness remain." Hi, post-editing Frey here. So I know I've yapped for, let me just check my notes, over 20 minutes now, but there are still some minor historical references I want to highlight, particularly the music in the game. One of the major puzzles in the game involves having to figure out the order to play the piano keys in order to unlock the puppet kept in the cage. You figure out the order by playing a previously collected tape. It goes like this. This song is, unsurprisingly given the game's attention to detail, real. It is titled The Torment of a Flower by lyricist Chu Tam-ong and Hakka composer Teng Yu-sun. The lyrics are quite depressive, being about a lonely singer noting the tree blossoms' torment from the elements. More real-world songs are present in the game as well. Another puzzle midway through the game involves having to tune to specific radio frequencies to change the world around you. It is honestly my favourite set piece in the entire game, but the actual significant point here is the songs themselves. This one is the 1934 song. Yeah, I'm not even gonna dare try and pronounce that. The other two, though, I don't have an issue with, because I don't know what the songs are. Surprisingly, obscure Taiwanese songs from the 1930s are hard to find. If you're asking, what is so important about these songs, it is because they were actually banned during the White Terror period, as were many other pieces of media. This is the game again highlighting the oppressive nature of the time period and also exploring its Taiwanese identity, showing off songs from the country's famous historical pieces. Okay, no more yapping, I promise. Now that we have covered the history of Detention, it's about time to discuss the second half of Detention, the religious elements that serve as the foundation of its world. Religion is very important to Detention. Part of the previously mentioned goal of showcasing Taiwan is by highlighting its diverse religious culture and using it to craft the supernatural structure of the game. Right at the beginning of the game, we get our first religious reference. As our characters attempt to leave the school, they find that the bridge they need to cross is destroyed. More importantly, however, is the river below. It appears to be flowing entirely with blood. As confirmed later on, this is the river Sanzu. In Japanese Buddhism, the river Sanzu is the river the dead must cross in order to enter the afterlife. As you can already assume, our characters aren't alive anymore. We are in the spirit world, and the collapsed bridge means we cannot move on yet. It is a common motif in East Asian folklore of spirits being trapped, and the only way to progress to the next life is by achieving some sort of goal, often being to deal with unfinished business. Already Detention is emphasizing its East Asian roots. Though we aren't the only ones to inhabit this space, we soon encounter the game's enemy type, the Lingard. The game has two variations of the Lingard, the regular Lingard and the Lantern Spectre. The regular is the one we encounter first in the game outside the auditorium. They resemble a schoolgirl, similar to our character with short black hair through with a decrepit face. You have to hold your breath in order to bypass them. If you fail to do so, they will shriek and rush after you. Now, there is no definite explanation as to what the Lingard are. They have no direct parallels with any beings or entities in folklore. Keeping their origins as vague as possible allows Red Candle to make as many creative liberties as they wish. Most likely they are, as the name suggests, lingering memories from previous cycles of the game's event. As we exist in a purgatory-like state, we relive the same events over and over. This is pretty cut and dry, though there is something that ties them with the wider religious aspect of the game. Food offerings are an item you can find in the nurse's office. Their purpose is to distract any lingard you find in your way. Just by simply placing it on the ground, it attracts them and you can slip by as they eat away at it. Now, game-wise, they are kinda mediocre. Sure, they can be used to slip past the lingard, but you can already do that by holding your breath, and running into a room stops them from getting to you, and they are only around for a tiny section of the entire game. What's really of note is their significance in Buddhism and wider East Asian culture. Food offerings are common beyond the Sinosphere, done so for many reasons, mainly concerning the disattachment of greed, to appease spirits, show respect to one's ancestors, among others. So of course they are a common sight in Taiwan. The food offerings connection to the lingard makes me believe they might have been inspired by hungry ghosts. Hungry ghosts are beings in Buddhism and Taoism cursed with never-ending hunger, hence the name. They have become this way due to the negative karma they have accumulated from their greed in their past lives. It is considered an existence no soul desires, as the gates of the underworld are believed to open on the 7th lunar month of the Chinese calendar, known as Zhongwan Li Ji to Taoists and Yulan Pen to Buddhists. The living provide offerings of food and other materials to please the spirits as to prevent these wandering spirits from giving bad luck or even cursing them. Though the festival has a lot to do with these hungry ghosts, it should be noted that the observation of these festivals is equally to venerate one's ancestors who can connect to their descendants during this time. Having the lingard be related to hungry ghosts matches with the game's themes of guilt and repentance. It also reinforces that we're not in the mortal realm anymore, now we exist among spirits. The other lingard type is the lantern spectre. They are noticeably taller than the basic lingard, wearing more traditional clothing and carrying a lantern. To avoid being attacked, you must look away from them and hold your breath as they inspect you. They're more straightforward than the basic lingard. They catch wandering spirits. Indeed, the game does lean more onto the religious practices performed during these occasions. Later in the game, one of the puzzles involves burning spirit money to reveal a necessary item. But what is spirit money? Well, the name is self-explanatory. It is money meant for those who have passed. The purpose of its burning is to provide for the dead so that they have the money needed to live comfortably in the afterlife. These consistent spiritual practices further cement Detention's Taiwanese identity, as while these practices are not strictly from the country, they are a big part of the island's modern culture that the devs wanted to highlight. And the Buddhism references don't stop there. Venturing into this room, where we obtain the counseling record, all over the walls are the repeated words of Amitabha, the principal Buddha in East Asian Buddhism, again tying into that East Asian religious aspect. But interestingly, I've seen people online state that the writing of it like this is essentially like one is begging for their life, which fits in with the eerie atmosphere and the themes of guilt that run throughout the game. But we shall move away from just the practices and whatnot. The game also gives us explicit references to multiple figures in Chinese folk religion, such as the duo of Hai Bai Wo Chang. As the game notes, they were two officials who died protecting each other, leading to the Lord of the Dead appointing them as messengers of the dead. Their duty is to escort the souls of the departed towards the afterlife. A door beside the note is imprinted with the iconography of the two, needing to get through it to advance. The imagery isn't subtle here. We, as a spirit, must be guided on our path by the hands of Hai Bai Wo Chang, though the imagery of the underworld doesn't end with them. On every death, we appear on a foggy road in front of the school, needing to make our way back. On this road, we encounter a lone elderly woman that gives you advice on how to progress. This old lady is, as you guessed, another Chinese figure, this time being of Meng Po, goddess of forgetfulness. While Hai Bai Wo Chang escorts spirits to the underworld, Meng Po ensures that spirits forget their past lives before they are reincarnated. She is almost always depicted as an elderly woman, which Detention replicates, though not with her signature bowl of soup. Meng Po even shows up in the epilogue as a neat bit of continuity, so that no matter what, you will always have to encounter her. Though a much more imposing figure appears in our journey, we are brought before Justice Cheng Huang, a guardian deity that people consult for guidance and to pray to for their well-being, as our character mentions our mother doing so, and ultimately we do as well. We seek answers and clarity from Cheng Huang, getting a mixed load of responses. And of course, we can't end this without mentioning the most obvious reference we get throughout the game. The save points in the games we use to save our progress are shrines that we pray to. Now that is all on the religious side, but there is one more detail in the game that I feel worth mentioning, but it doesn't really fit anywhere else. Back his way, there's an old photograph you can find, followed with a poetic statement, "The roots below the earth claim no rewards for making the branches fruitful." This is a part of one of many poems by Bengali writer Rabindranath Tagore. While I don't think it's important to know much about Tagore himself, the line in the game is likely a talking point about selflessness, persons providing for others while gaining nothing from it personally. This is likely in reference to the book club. It is a place where people like Chang and Yin risk their necks to benefit others with nothing given to them in return. They are motivated by ideals rather than material gain, like a tree root allowing for branches to bear fruits. Detention is fondly remembered as one of the most well-known games from Taiwan, and for good reason. The game undoubtedly succeeds at showing off the rich foundation that it was built on. The history presented is unobstructed and doesn't shy away from its horrors. It is an unapologetic depiction of the cruel injustices that thousands had to go through for decades. It is a difficult decision to showcase one's own country in such a depressive way. It would have been much easier to show a less gruesome side to Taiwan, but Coffee Yao and everyone else at Red Candle Games was determined to keep alive a dying memory. Their choice of presentation gives a sense of uneasiness to it, not from the fact that the horror is there, but because that horror was a fact for millions of real-world people. You cannot be genuine in your exploration of your country's history without being prepared to show the ugliest parts of it. The White Terror is a complicated topic for the island, to say the least. Treated like a dirty secret of sorts, it is a recognized part of the country's history, but is still a difficult topic for many people to acknowledge. Sentiments like, "it was terrible, but it was all in the past," or alternatively, used as a political tool against the KMT in electoral debates. Some claim the martial law was a necessity to protect the country, while others condemn every action of the time. Ultimately, Detention doesn't present the White Terror in any tainted lens. It only wants to bring attention to its home's history and dispel ignorance, using Taiwan's religious background as a medium to tell that story. It is a message of coming to terms with the authoritarian past of a terrible regime, keeping the memory alive so that, moving forward, the freedom thousands died achieving for their country is never lost again. That is what makes Detention truly, uniquely Taiwanese. Thank you for watching, and remember to never forget.